delighted to be asked back to do a second one from here in Kilkenny City. So I suppose the secret of every good meeting is structure and respect, I suppose. So respect for each other. If anybody is talking, obviously nobody talk over them and that kind of stuff, and the structure is very important, or an agenda, I suppose. So there'll be 3 sections to the meeting. The first one will be Tom's introduction. We'll hand you over to him in a moment, and then we'll take a questions and answer session, and then a cup of tea, and sometimes that's where all the real talk goes on, over a cup of tea. I point this out at all of the meetings. Tom is currently not a sitting councillor. He's not elected to the local council. He's not elected to Dáil Éireann just yet, but we're hoping with your help he will be. So anything that has happened in the past, or anything that is topical now, in relation to bike sheds or security hoods, it's not his fault. So we will just dismiss all of those type of things at the meeting tonight. All questions will be, what if you get elected, will you do, and so forth. So I'd like to hand you over then to Mr. Tom Healy.
Thanks very much, James. And, so good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for coming. I should begin by thanking James for coming out again this evening, and it's wonderful to be together for this important occasion. We may be few, but I think the importance of some of the issues we're going to discuss, I think, means that we have a responsibility as citizens, as voters, as people who care about our society and our communities, not just our local community, that's very, very important, but our country, and indeed our world, because I don't need to say that we are going through huge changes, huge difficulties and challenges, and I will touch on these. I'd also like just to say that I'm delighted to be joined here this evening by my daughter Catherine, who came all the way from Dublin, my wife Bridget, who's been a great support over the last few weeks and months. We thought long and hard about this matter, and before I made the decision to actually contest this forthcoming general election. I think we can safely say that there isn't going to be a by-election, so I think that's a reasonable presumption at this stage. So it's going to be a general election. I won't predict when, but I would think it's reasonable to say that it's going to be very soon, very, very soon. And that means we have to be ready. I'd also like to thank everyone else for coming. Roisin and Paul, whom I know from Irish Political Roundup. Kathleen, a good friend over the years from Ferrybank. Joseph, who's been doing great work over the last few weeks out on the canvas trail. We were out early, and we've got a little bit of a head start maybe ahead of the other parties. Dennis, who's from our own parish in Goresbridge, and have I missed anyone? Paddy, of course, from Bagnallstown, which is basically our local town. So I'm fortunate in that we are living in Goresbridge, which, looking at the map, is the dead centre. I think it's the absolute dead centre of the Carlow-Kilkenny constituency. The redrawn constituency, it excludes now the northwestern part of County Kilkenny, but it includes everything from Ferrybank, where Kathleen is from, in the south of Kilkenny. It's really, am I okay to say that it's Waterford City? That'd be an ecumenical matter. And I'm going to come back to this issue of Ferrybank and Bellevue, because I think there's an important issue there we need to consider. And of course, all of Carlow is included, and Kilkenny City. So it's a very big area. It's about roughly 110,000 people on the electoral register, I think. And about 70,000 households. So if anyone's good at maths, that means that a quota to elect a TD in a 5-seater constituency is going to be approximately 12,000 votes. So no small undertaking. Obviously, the system of voting that we have is wonderfully complicated, and it allows for preferences, and it allows for candidates to make it over the final line on the basis of transfers from other candidates. So number ones are very important, but preferences are extremely important as well. A lot of people perhaps don't fully realise the significance of that until you've presented at an election count and you look at the hundreds of ballot papers and you see suddenly that Murphy is transferring to McCarthy and McCarthy is transferring to Brennan, and so on and so on. And it's literally the 7th and 8th preferences that come into play that make a crucial difference on the final count. So I think all of that needs to be emphasised, because in what I'm going to say this evening, it may be that you don't agree with anything that I'm going to say, and that's fine. That's the purpose of having an election and the way democracy works. The only challenge you have then is to decide whether you give me the 14th preference or the 15th preference. You should, please, do go all the way down on the ballot paper to the 15th candidate. I'm assuming that there will be roughly 15 candidates running. About 13 have declared at the moment, and I think there might be another 2 or 3 maybe, depending. So, so much for the workings of PR. I should say as well that there may be people here who agree with some things I'm saying, but very much disagree with other things, and that's fine. And one has to make a decision looking at all the candidates and all the parties. What are my values? What do I really care about here? How do I make a choice based on all these different values? But also the proven track record of a candidate to deliver for their community. And of course, as a newcomer, I have a challenge because I'm not as well known perhaps yet as John McGuinness or other candidates who shall remain nameless. And so there is a challenge in terms of establishing your position in a very contested field where very often people have had decades of experience in their local communities. And I fully acknowledge and salute the great work that has been done by the sitting TDs, at least those who are coming back again. Some have retired, of course, and Kathleen Funchion has moved on to the European Parliament. But, and also, of course, the work by county councillors and party activists who work day in, day out. And I think we owe respect to everyone who's involved in the political process, no matter what their background or views are, that they are acting, I believe, from a position of goodwill and from a position of caring for their fellow human beings. And I think we should always bear that in mind. I'm waiting for someone to come to my door yet, looking for a vote, and I'm going to say, come on in, have a cup of tea, let's talk. I'll keep you an hour having a cup of tea, because you won't be able to canvass as many people maybe in Goresbridge. But seriously, no, I think it's important to keep that mutual respect, and that's difficult in the current political climate. Perhaps in the world, we see politics in America, especially, going in a very toxic way. And maybe, I think there are threats and possibilities here in Ireland that some of the things we took for granted are at risk when it comes to the security and safety of people in public life and the way that we conduct ourselves in public life and on social media and in one-to-one conversations. So what I want to do is very briefly just take you through the 12 points of my election manifesto. It's all on the website. There's not too much detail there at the moment. I hope to elaborate a little bit on some of the points over the next few weeks on the website. But I feel I have to begin at the very beginning, and bear with me, because this is a framework of what I refer to as basic and fundamental human rights, from the very beginning to the very end of life. And for me personally, the importance of the right to life, including the right to life of unborn children, is extremely important. And I have to be very honest here and say that this is the primary reason that I became involved in politics. I became involved in politics after I retired. I had been involved when I was a younger adult many years ago. I was a member of the Labour Party in the 1970s and early 1980s. And then I was in the public service for many years. And you're not allowed to be, in the civil service, you're not allowed to be a member of a political party for good reason. So I became involved about a year ago, and this issue, I think, weighs on me. Now, I am a realist, and I recognise the decision made by the Irish people in 2018. I recognise as well that the views that I have on this matter are not shared by a majority of people, particularly amongst young people. I fully accept and acknowledge that fact. My position on this matter is that we need to acknowledge the evolving nature of the debate on this and the scientific evidence around the development of human life. And I think that it's really important that voters in Ireland are aware of what is coming down the track in terms of legislation that would further liberalise our laws. I'm talking about a piece of legislation, the bill, which was passed by a majority of TDs, yes, a majority of TDs last year. It passed second stage and it went to an Oireachtas committee which recommended broadly a liberalisation in the law. Now, I won't go into all the details of it. I just want to flag this as a really important issue. I believe that we should hold the line where we are and not go any further, but that view is obviously something that would be quite controversial. I'm deliberately raising this issue because, and I'm raising it at the outset, because I believe we do need to be honest, we need to acknowledge the issue, and we need to talk about it. And I think the stance of other candidates needs to be clear on this issue. And sometimes people duck and dive on this issue. The second issue that I want to bring up here in the manifesto is the right to live in a livable planet. One of the most crucial challenges, in fact, the biggest challenge facing the survival of the human species is environmental damage and climate change and all that that entails. And we can see this ourselves. We know that climate is changing. It's a complex matter. We know as well that the difficult and painful decisions that need to be made will impact on all of us. We need to make sacrifices for future generations. And that means that areas that we take for granted, such as energy, the way we travel, the food supply, the key role of agriculture, transport, also the way that we construct and build homes, all of this has huge implications for carbon footprint, and collectively, at global level, this is going to determine the future of the human race. And we have a huge responsibility at this moment in history to make those decisions that are necessary to begin to reverse the damage that has been done. Ireland, of course, is a small player, but we have a role morally on the international plane to give good example. It is a difficult matter because some groups are going to be more susceptible to measures such as carbon taxes, for example. I'm thinking here of low-income families and households, but also the agricultural sector that are vulnerable to policies and changes that are going to disproportionately impact on them. So we have to find a way, it's referred to as the just transition, we have to find a way that insulates people against loss in income and increases in cost of living, so that we can make this transition in a way that is fair. If we don't make the transition, we are all the worse off in the future. The third right I want to speak about is the right to work. And I've spent a lot of my time, especially in the last 15 years, working in the trade union movement, and I'm still active, although I'm retired, in my union Forsa. The right to work, the right to adequate pay, to conditions of work. Also, the right to participate in collective bargaining is crucial. And Ireland is behind other European countries in relation to legal rights to collective bargaining and union recognition. In fact, there is a European Adequate Minimum Wage Directive, it's a bit of a mouthful, which is meant to be transposed into Irish law no later than the 15th of November. Now, the 15th of November is a significant date because at home in my calendar I have a circle around the 15th of November, and I'm not telling you why. But I think it's really important that the rights of workers and the capacity of public policy to contribute to welfare work is such an important part, paid work is such an important part of our lives, that we need to pay much closer attention to the way that trade unions can defend the rights of workers and contribute as well through social partnership and dialogue to a more just workplace. We are seeing the rise of a precariat, of a very vulnerable cohort of workers, low paid, subject to very casual contracts, and the outsourcing of a lot of work. And we even see that in the public sector, where a lot of work is now contracted out. We see it in the hospitals, in the education system, and other areas. So I believe that we need strong unions backed by good laws and by effective procedures for dialogue and engagement with employees and employers. The fourth area that I want to talk about is the right to a home, and this is a very basic, fundamental human right. And the problem, of course, in the housing crisis, and this is the first topic that is coming up almost all the time on the doorsteps. We've canvassed already about 5,000 houses between Carlow and Kilkenny. We've a few more to go. And housing is a real hurt for people. We have a situation where a whole generation of young people have effectively been locked out of their homes, of owning homes. And all the time I'm coming across 2-3 generations under the same roof in a relatively small house, and a sense of despair. We've no chance, we've no hope that our son or daughter will be able to buy a home anytime in the future. I'm just looking at Catherine, but anyway.
No need to personalise it.
But so I think the right to homes is crucial. No one is questioning this almost, but well, that's debatable, because the right to own a home, I believe, should be in the Constitution. And someone said to me the other day, that's very socialist. I said, well, I suppose it is really, actually, when you think about it. But look at it this way, I said, if we vindicate the right to private property exclusively in the Constitution in such a manner that the courts can strike down a tax on vacant property or land, then I think there is a case for a constitutional amendment. And that's something that I would be supporting. In terms of how to do it, I believe that the fundamental problem is that we have cut back on public investment in social and affordable housing. That didn't begin in the economic crisis of 2009. It began in the 1980s. And it's something that is associated with Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, who said, you can own your own home now, and there's no need for the public domain to get involved in building homes or renting out public housing. And of course, many of the houses were sold off at a discount. It seemed great. Everyone could be a stakeholder in capitalism, yeah. And what we found over 3 or 4 decades is that there was a dramatic fall in local authority new builds, to a point where, when the economic crisis hit in 2008, the construction of social housing stopped. It literally stopped in most counties. And here in Kilkenny, the County Council is delivering approximately just under 200 social homes. That figure is probably going to be a bit higher this year. And it's a way short of what needs to be done to begin to clear the backlog of homelessness and people on the housing waiting list. So housing and the construction of homes, I think, is the biggest single social issue facing us, and it's coming up again and again on the doorsteps. But there is another issue that is less talked about and that is going to be really crucial in the coming few months, and that is healthcare, because we are in the middle of a crisis of funding and staffing. The relevant authorities, the HSE, the Department of Health and the government are in denial. They're saying that, look, we're increasing the budget to 26 billion this year, we're employing 35,000 extra healthcare staff since I think about 2020. The point is that once the restrictions on the embargo on recruitment kicked in the year of 2007, we never fully recovered. We just about recovered in 2020, and then COVID happened, and last year there was an embargo. The embargo was replaced by what's referred to as a pay and number strategy, and the effect of this is going to be crippling on health services as we go into a clinical winter. So if I were the Taoiseach, I would go for a general election early, because they are going to run into big trouble in January and February. So healthcare is really crucial. One part of healthcare I want to flag is that of mental health. In my view, and I'm not an expert on healthcare or mental health in particular, but I think I can claim to know enough about these areas to be able to say that the provision of mental health services in general at community level and in the acute psychiatric hospital setting is nothing short of scandalous. Community health services claim to offer a therapeutic approach. No such thing. They're offering principally a biomedical approach, and there is virtually no occupational therapy and therapeutic follow-up. I know this from experience working with families and individuals, and I find it scandalous that they are now proposing to change the legislation on mental health without putting in place the proper resources and supports and vindicating the right of mentally unwell people, and also the rights of families and loved ones who want to do their best for those who are unwell. Here in Carlow and Kilkenny, we should have a service that provides the right support at the right time, in the right place, in the right way. Now that might seem like a slogan, but it's very important, because a young person, a person of any age, presenting in accident and emergency department with a mental health crisis, there is nowhere to go. There is nowhere to go. They have to be in such a state to be admitted to the Department of Psychiatry, the DOP, in the hospital here in St. Luke's, and then very often they're sent home and there is no proper follow-up. And that is unacceptable, and there have been some tragedies here in County Kilkenny and County Carlow with devastating effect on families. The sixth point is the right to lifelong learning. I'm not going to elaborate on the issue of special educational needs, except to say that this is coming up very frequently from families and mothers and fathers. And it's a complicated story. There's a lot involved here. In my view, the solution to this is twofold. It is a question of putting in more money, but secondly, it's a question of institutional reform and getting all the myriad of agencies involved here. There are about half a dozen different agencies you have to deal with if your child is diagnosed with ADHD or autism, for example. And even before you get to a diagnosis and assessment, you're waiting for years, literally. And there are children who have no place in school. The figure is about 200 at the moment nationally. And we know that there are vacancies, unfilled posts at the level of senior psychologist in County Carlow, and that is having an immediate impact on families, especially in County Carlow, in accessing services. When people do access assessment and diagnosis, the services very often are not there in the schools. It's not necessarily the absence of teachers and SNAs, it's the absence of occupational therapists and speech and language. Not just speech and language services for children, but speech and language services for people who have had strokes. It's, again, wholly inadequate. 7, the right to live with dignity. I believe that we should move towards higher taxes, higher public spending, higher employment levels, higher productivity, and we should move away from the Boston model that has dominated Irish politics, particularly since the coalition of the PDs and Fianna Fáil in the late 1990s. They did irreparable damage to the Irish economy. They cut capital gains taxes, they deregulated the banking system, they privatised whole swathes of the public service and commercial public sector, and in many ways they laid the foundation for the economic crisis that struck in 2008. Yes, there was an international crash, Lehman's, but the problem was greatly exacerbated in Ireland by adherence to an ideological model which I call neoliberalism. And that ideology is still with us, and it has been embraced, I believe, by successive governments, including governments who implemented the austerity programme, the fiscal adjustment, in such a manner as to cut back on expenditure, to avoid taking the necessary and painful steps of raising taxes on capital and taxes also on the higher income groups. And what we've ended up with is a disjointed system where taxation in general is heavily reliant now on corporate taxes. It's a very, very dangerous step. Last year we took in 37 billion euro in corporate taxes, which is more than what we took in income taxes. Now just think about this. If 3 American companies decided to pull out of Ireland, we are in very serious problems. Our structural deficit, when you strip out corporate taxes that are exceptional, is actually, we have a deficit. We don't have a surplus, we have a deficit. Now, I believe that we should certainly tax corporations, but we should use that money not for day-to-day expenditure, but for investment, particularly in energy, in housing, in water services, in areas that are critical as well to environmental change and challenge. 8 is the right to live in peace and security, and I will try and bring this to a close because I want to open up obviously for conversation and discussion. I think it's important that we take our responsibilities internationally seriously. I'm committed to neutrality, but I'm also committed to a mature discussion on what that means in today's world, particularly as members of the European Union. I think we should stay militarily neutral, but I don't think anyone can deny that we are not politically neutral in the conflict that is going on in the Ukraine, for example. And Ireland, I think, because of its position and its history, has a strategic role to play in leveraging peace, in reaching out to different groups and parties. 9 is the right to participate in society, and I think I'm very much committed to the importance of equal rights by gender, by sexual orientation, by social background, by creed, by colour. I think we need to defend our republic against ideologies that sow division and hatred. And this is a second reason, I have to tell you, that I've decided to run for election. I am very concerned about my country, and I want to stand up for my republic, to stand on principles of inclusion and democracy, free speech, the rule of law, and some of the things that we are observing on our streets and on our TVs. This is very, very concerning. It's a complex area, but I think we need to be very clear about our values as a republic. In many ways, I see this coming general election as a battle for the soul of Ireland, for the decency and humanity of the Irish people. And I'm proud of my country, and I love my country, and I don't want to see my country going the way that it seems to have been going, especially in the last year. before doing an gaige a